When I was growing up in Dublin, I had 4 very unruly brothers. And my mother, under pain of death, used to say to us, there's 3 things you can never talk about at the dinner table. The first is sex, the second is politics, and the third is religion. So I'm going to talk about all 3 tonight to make up for that. And I think that, in spite of the fact that sometimes it makes us uncomfortable, sometimes some of these issues do make us uncomfortable, I think it's very important that we do, for the exact reasons that Jenny and Suzanne have outlined. These matters are absolutely critical for the health, welfare and dignity of women in this country and elsewhere. The Irish Central Statistics Office says the percentage of population professing Catholicism is 84.2%. It's the lowest in over 100 years, and that's despite the arrival of Catholics from other countries. In spite of the fact that 84.2 is the lowest it has been in a long time, it still is a significant percentage of the population. But like other parts of the world, I think it's highly doubtful that those Catholics who profess to be followers of Catholicism actually follow the dictates of the bishops when it comes to many moral and ethical matters. The Statistics Office also tell us that those who profess no religion are 300,000, a 4-fold increase, biggest among atheists. So I would argue with you that it's not true that Catholic Ireland is dead and gone, but I think it has changed dramatically. And I think it's not quite dead, but it has a very bad case of pneumonia. And I really do hope that it recovers soon. Because Ireland of the past, and I think it's often painted as being very dark and insular, and indeed in some ways it was. But for many of us, Catholicism is not something that was dark and insular. Catholicism was and is very important in our lives. Whether it's the baptism of your child, whether it's the confirmation of your daughter, whether it's the celebration and the sacraments, it's a very important part of the fabric of many people's lives. I don't think it's fair to ask Catholics to choose between their religion and their freedom. And many of us don't want to have to choose between the 2 of them because we see the 2 of them as being essentially the same. After independence, Catholic religious culture firmly enshrined itself into modern Irish society. Jon O'Brien said the Catholic Church was felt, feared and courted on all sides as a dominant power. You remember, divorce wasn't allowed, contraception was banned or severely restricted. Being gay was illegal under 1861, the same law that convicted Oscar Wilde. Abortion was illegal and remains now unavailable. There was widespread censorship. The Catholic hierarchy was not solely responsible for all of these things. I think politicians did a lot in going along with them. But when politicians like Noel Brown stood up with the mother and child scheme way back in the 1950s, he stood up for the maternity rights of Irish women and for Irish children. He was branded a communist and basically drove out of office. So the idea that the Catholic hierarchy certainly helped shape a lot of society in a way that was inadequate for the needs of the people, with the coalescence of many politicians, I think was true. And then we fought back. We fought back about issues like contraception, and it was absolutely critical. The people who fought for the legalization of contraception in the Republic of Ireland were Catholics, and we consider ourselves to be good Catholics. Why was contraception such a controversial issue? Well, going back to the 1960s, the term grand multiparity was actually coined in Dublin, in the maternity hospitals. It's where they were seeing women with birth after birth after birth, with no give up, until women died as a result of not being able to control their fertility. Irish people stood up and wanted to do something about that, and we eventually did. But you know, John the 23rd was a great reforming pope. He actually believed in a thing called aggiornamento, or bringing the church up to date. He knew there was the invention of the modern contraceptive pill. The contraceptive pill, by the way, was invented by Dr. John Rock, an Irish Catholic in Boston, ironically enough. When John the 23rd saw that the birth control pill was there, he thought maybe people should talk about it. So we want to include it in Vatican II. Vatican II, if you remember, was a great reforming moment, a great aggiornamento within the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, the more conservative people suggested that we set up a different committee called the Birth Control Commission. The Birth Control Commission met over many years to consider contraception. You know, Pope Paul the 23rd passed away, Pope Paul VI took over, and Pope Paul VI had a great idea. Why don't we have people who actually have sex be part of the Birth Control Commission? What a radical notion. So we brought along good Catholic couples who came along and took part in the Birth Control Commission. Those couples told the bishops and the priests what married life was like if you didn't have access to contraception, how you feared intimacy with your partner, how child after child after child would really drain a family of everything. You know, it's one of the reasons I'm a Catholic. I believe in miracles. Because what happened in the Birth Control Commission was the hearts and minds of those bishops changed. And the majority report from the Birth Control Commission said there was no impediment to changing church teaching on contraception. No impediment to changing church teaching. Sadly, Pope Paul VI didn't have enough faith in Catholics because he listened to the more conservative voices in the Birth Control Commission. So the majority report said no problem changing the teaching on birth control. The minority report said that they should maintain the ban on contraception. That meant that each and every marriage act, each and every time you have sex, it must remain open to the transmission of life. Catholics knew that was wrong. Catholics the world over knew that was wrong and soundly rejected it. Many of us didn't stop being Catholics, but we did want change. And I think that change on the issues like contraception come because the Catholic Church is not a building in Rome. The Catholic Church is not a cathedral. The Catholic Church is the people. So next time, if you're an atheist, and you want to criticize, sure, you can criticize the hierarchy of the church, who keeps some of these very moded, very outdated, and very wrong social teachings, when Catholics have long since moved on from them. One of the reasons I'm a Catholic is I believe in social justice. I believe in the preferential option for the poor. And I know poor people suffer when they don't have access to contraception and when they have to resort to illegal abortion. I work in places like El Salvador, where women are thrown in jail for 15 years, or in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where women die because they don't have access to a safe and legal abortion procedure. So are all these Catholics I'm talking about, are they bad Catholics? Well, at the very heart of church teaching on moral matters is a serious regard for conscience. Conscience. Now this doesn't mean you just get up one morning and say, I wonder what I feel like doing today. Absolutely not. You have to take seriously the teachings of the bishops. You have to take seriously and question yourself seriously about your life and about your decision making and about your moral and ethical decision making. But at the end of the day, the final arbiter in moral decision making as a Catholic is to follow your conscience. And that's what Catholic women and men do every day when they make difficult decisions in negotiating some of these social issues that are dictated by the bishops in ways that no longer make sense from a justice perspective, especially for those who are poor. Now, the church has long thought, the hierarchy have long thought, that abortion is sinful. Although the reasons why it's sinful has changed over time, actually. They say it's unchanged and unchangeable, but they change their minds on a pretty regular basis. So originally, the early prohibition on abortion was not based on concern with the fetus at all. The early ban on abortion was based upon the perversity view. In other words, if you didn't want to be pregnant, maybe it's because you did something sexually wrong. You might be a little bit pregnant with someone else's pregnancy other than your husband's. So there was this idea that you had done something wrong because of a sexual sin. The church doesn't very much teach that, although the hierarchy does have that, I think, behind a lot of its thinking. Then there was the ontological view. The ontological view was in the 17th century. You had these doctors of the church, and they were looking through microscopes that probably resemble more jam jars than actual what you would think is a microscope. And they thought they saw fully formed human fetuses. So they're like, well, you know, this is wrong from an ontological point of view. Sadly, we haven't stopped looking through those jam jars, but I can tell you that the 1974 Declaration on Procured Abortion from the Vatican says there is not a unanimous tradition on this point, and the authors are yet in disagreement as to when a fetus reaches personhood. Now, this disagreement has a long history within the Church. Neither St. Augustine nor St. Thomas Aquinas, two of the most important theologians in the Catholic tradition, considered the fetus in the early stages of pregnancy to be a person. Not many people talk about that these days, right? But I think instinctively many Catholics know that while being pregnant and the life that's in the uterus is very serious indeed, I don't think they form a moral or ethical equivalency with a born person. So, church teaching, does it mean that because, you know, usually atheists say this to me, I think Catholics know it's not true, but atheists usually say things like, well, you're a Catholic, so what about the Pope being infallible? Well, the first thing is teaching in relation to abortion is not infallible. You have a right to dissent from non-infallible church teaching. And the other thing is, the three things the Pope is infallible. The first is the assumption of Mary's body into heaven. The second is the Immaculate Conception. And naturally, because theologians made this up, the third one is the idea of infallibility is actually infallible. So there you go. But what's important is that the principle of reception is also important within Catholicism. It's the idea that for a teaching to have validity, it should be received by the people. I would put it to you, the world over, when it comes to contraception, the teaching is not received. 99% of sexually active Catholic women in the United States of America use a method of birth control the bishops disagree with. You heard that right? 99%. I don't know what the story is with the other 1%, but I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating that you could have a teaching that is so disregarded and so rejected. Catholic women, many parts of the world, including the United States, have abortions at the same rates as those of other faith or of no faith. And don't tell me that the over 3,000 Irish women who travel every year and are forced to travel away from their homes are all Protestants. I just won't play that for a minute. They're by and large Catholics who in good conscience have to make a decision about what they are going to do. So I believe that there's a lot within church teaching to allow moral and ethical decision making, and that's what Irish women do every day along with their sisters around the world. So what type of world can we live in? What can we do? Because in reality, I think there are some Catholics and non-Catholics as well, who disagree with abortion. I'd never had one myself. And I think that that is perfectly valid for someone to feel. I wouldn't have one myself. But do you want to deny that freedom to somebody else? Have you even got a right to deny that freedom to somebody else? You might not choose it. But we all know the difficulties that we experience in life. And I think the idea of tolerance towards the other is a very Catholic concept indeed. So I know many Catholics, many Catholic politicians, for example, who would say to me that it makes me feel uncomfortable, but I won't stand in other people's way to follow their consciences and make the decision that's right for them and their families. So then there's the question then of, we do live in a society that has different views. How do people live and coexist together respectfully? How can I respect what you believe? And I believe that's why Ireland should move towards truly being a secular society. Does a secular society mean an anti-religious society? Absolutely not. And I'd be the first to stand up and fight against any society, anyone in society, who wants to take away people's right to believe as they see fit, to follow their consciences. And I think for Ireland or for any country, I think the idea of a secular society believes in freedom of religion and freedom from religion. You should have the right to follow what is right and good for you as an individual. And I think that's a way that we can all coexist together with a variety of different feelings and different views. I think Irish society has come a long way. In some ways it's unrecognisable from those of us who grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I'm sure, I see it everywhere that there's a lot of good and there's a lot that could be done better. But I believe that when it comes to reproductive freedom, I think it's very important that people have a right to decide for themselves. And I think when people choose to continue a pregnancy, they should have the proper supports and proper financing and proper services that they deserve to be able to continue that pregnancy, regardless of the circumstances. And I think that that's where we, as a community, need to work harder and better so that those who continue their pregnancy can do so with absolute dignity, respect and freedom. And those who choose to end a pregnancy would be respected for that very private decision that should be between them and their consciences.